First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's great to see a nice crowd here tonight. My name is Kim Roberts. For those of you who don't know me, I am an associate professor at Grand Valley State University and a video installation artist. And the reason that we're having these discussions today is that these are being offered, this one and another panel discussion that we had previously is being offered in conjunction with my exhibit at Open Concept Gallery, which is located over on 50 Louis. We have lots of information on the gallery and on the show here. If you haven't seen the show, we'd like you to take a look at it. It is an interactive video installation. It takes a little bit of work and a little bit of time, but I think that you will learn a lot of things about it. It is called Focus on the Family and deals with the pain and loss suffered by family and friends of victims of hate crime, rejection, prejudice due to sexual orientation. So hope you can get over there to see it. It's there till November 29th. So Focus on the Family is the first exhibit at Open Concept Gallery. And if you haven't seen that space, I would hope that you'd even just go there for that. You don't have to go there to see my show. But anyway, it's a great space. And Zora Carrier, if you could stand. Where's Zora? Okay, she's the curator and director of Open Concept Gallery. And Lisa is here now to say a few words about Open Concept Galleries, just to let you know what it is. It's this new venue in town that's very exciting. So I'll let her do that.
I'm Lisa McManus, and I am a volunteer at the gallery. In fact, all of our people at the gallery are volunteers. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, and it'll just take a second. Open Concept Gallery is a nonprofit gallery dedicated to community education through contemporary art and related events such as this one. The mission of the gallery is to create a platform for the type of contemporary art that is seldom for sale and rarely reaches Grand Rapids. This type of community art and community gallery is unique in the U.S. It provides members and the community at large a space in which to strengthen the bonds of community while sharing information about contemporary art and social issues. As a nonprofit gallery, we depend on the community for support. I invite all of you to stop over, as everyone else has, to take a look at this exhibit. It'll give you a sense of what we're doing in this gallery and to meet the people who are volunteering and participating there every day. So thanks for coming, and with that, we'll turn it over to Dan.
To you. Okay. Yes, it's a wonderful gallery, a wonderful mission, and I would really like to thank Zora and Lisa and all the volunteers. It's just been it's a great space to show, and I encourage if there's any artists in the room to look that place up. Okay. Also like to thank Professor Klaas Quant for being here today. He's a professor at Grand Rapids Community College and does a lot of this professional taping, so we're going to get a nice professional job. And the last panel discussion was also taped. We will have links. I'll have a link on my website, and also there'll be one on Open Concept and probably School of Communication, so there'll be several places where they will be linked, and you'll be able to actually have a flash file, so your browser should be able to play these videos if you want to share them with friends or family, so they aren't lost after today. So thank you very much for being here doing that. I'd like to thank our other two sponsors of tonight's event, Kendall College of Art and Design, my alma mater, and Grand Valley State University, my bread and butter. And I'm really proud and grateful to be connected to both of these institutions. Kendall just really taught me gave me my voice through art, which I did not know existed before going to Kendall, and so I'm forever grateful to them for that. And Grand Valley, of course, has been supporting me now for 10 years, and because of granting me a sabbatical leave, I was able to come up with this concept, work on art, think about things, calm down enough to actually focus on my own work for a while. So I just am really, really grateful for that. Although a discussion on hate crime against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people is challenging and painful, we hope that you will gain a better understanding of the complexities of this issue and will leave you tonight with new resolve for promoting change in all of your circles. Right now I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for the evening's event, and that is Dan Spalding. Dan is the Vice President and Principal at Seifert Spalding Tennis Incorporated of Grand Rapids. Working with senior management, Dan tackles internal communication challenges that range from mergers and acquisitions to labor relations. Numerous governmental agencies have benefited from Dan's counsel as well. Whether a city, an agency, or a department, sorting through the issues and crafting effective communications with constituencies can have complexities that benefit from the experience and objective counsel that Dan provides. Dan was a founding board member of the AIDS Foundation of Kent County, the first in the state and one of the first in the nation. In this role, he participated in what was then Gay Pride Day. Dan has also served as the PR counsel on the Concerned Clergy of West Michigan. At the end of this event, we will ask for an evaluation. You know how universities are. We have to do assessment on everything. So if you would please fill out an evaluation, we'll have a couple people handing those out at the end of the evening, and we'd really appreciate that. So I'm going to turn this over to Dan now, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Kim. I think I have the one microphone in the house that isn't either turned on or hot. Is it working? Okay. Let me begin by introducing the panel. What we'll do is introduce the panel and invite each of them to make an opening statement, get into a discussion. As you can see by the microphone right in front of us that Kim just used, we also are looking forward to discussions with all those in the audience as well. To begin, going all the way down to my far right, which would be on your left, which many in Grand Rapids would say is appropriate, is the Reverend Doug Van Doren. Doug is the pastor of Plymouth Church, an open and affirming congregation of the United Church of Christ. I can't say that Doug is preaching to the choir, but I can see by looking at the audience tonight that he's certainly preaching to some of the members of Plymouth Church, because we have several members here, and we welcome you. Thank you very much. If you travel down Kalamazoo Street, for those of you who haven't been to Plymouth Church, you can spot it easily as you're heading south. It's on your left. It's the big blue and white Wage Peace sign out front. Doug has been known for years for his efforts in the struggle for justice and equality, and is certainly well recognized in this community and beyond, and nationally in the United Church of Christ. I tease him a bit about being around here. He is known with a title I think he takes as a great honor. He's that radical Doug Van Doren. Doug is a founding member of the Concerned Clergy of West Michigan, formed to call churches to openness and acceptance of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. Next to Doug is Mr. Randy Flood. Randy is the founder and director of the Men's Resource Center at Fountain Hill here in Grand Rapids. Randy has specialized in working with men since 1992, providing individual and group psychotherapy for men, as well as designing and writing specialized programs for men who have problems with domestic abuse, sexual addiction, fathering, and anger management. So, welcome, Randy. And I'm delighted to have Chris Yared arrive and seated in the middle of all of this group. Chris, many of us know, has been a tireless advocate for many of these causes for decades in the area, and I was going to say, if we hadn't seen her already, that she was undoubtedly in court somewhere fighting for something, but she is here. And Chris has worked as an attorney for 21 years now in the area of civil rights, employment, family, criminal, and sexual orientation law. She's taught courses at Grand Valley State University, including constitutional law and civil liberties, civil litigation, and of course she has developed sexual orientation law and civil liberties. Christine has extensive speaking experience addressing topics such as domestic partnership benefits, parenting issues for gay and lesbian parents, same-sex marriage, criminal sodomy laws, and hate crimes. So welcome to Chris. And next up to the right, if you're looking at the panel, is Mayor George Hartwell. The Reverend and the Honorable George Hartwell has been a strong advocate for human rights and equality. Many of us know during his days in his Heartside ministry in downtown Grand Rapids, and also, of course, when he then sought elective office to the City Commission, where, as a City Commissioner, he cast a very critical vote in favor of the city's Community Relations Commission ordinance being amended to include gender orientation. As a result, that orientation amendment did pass, but it was only on a 4-3 vote. Without George, we wouldn't have it. George has been a guest speaker at a variety of places, at local gay, lesbian pride celebration events, and of course has always been a strong advocate for and a champion for civil rights in all areas. Next to George is a gentleman I just had the pleasure of meeting for the first time, Mr. Sean Kosofsky. He's Director of Policy of the Triangle Foundation. He's been active in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community since early 1994. I told Sean when I first met him that I was going to make the remark it was a good thing we had Chris Yerrod with us, or we were a bunch of aging white guys with Chris in the middle. But Sean came along, and I can't call him aging yet. Since he began his work, Sean has certainly become one of the most visible, recognizable, and accomplished GLBT activists in Michigan, as well as gaining national recognition for his work. He's most sought-after diversity trainer on this subject in Michigan for law enforcement professionals, and I've heard him talking to the mayor about that already, by the way, and has extensive experience training social workers, school professionals, attorneys, business professionals, and service providers. Sean conducts trainings on critical activist skills, including message development, media advocacy, lobbying, you sound like the competition. Grassroots activism, and youth and student advocacy. So we welcome Sean and appreciate you being with us tonight in Grand Rapids. Let's begin tonight with some opening thoughts from each of our panelists, beginning with the Reverend Doug Van Doren. Doug?
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction, I think. Appreciate being here. It's an honor to be with this group and say a few words, and certainly want to thank the sponsors as well, and very much to thank Kim Roberts for her video installation. You do need to get to Open Concept Gallery and see that show. It's very moving, so I hope that if you haven't got there, you'll manage to do that. I want to say just a few brief words about the church and its role in intolerance toward GLBTQ folks. Of course, not just intolerance, but aggressive intolerance. And look forward to some questions and comments among the panel and with you all as we all finish our remarks. Of course, the church is not a monolith, though on this issue, it pretty much has sadly been a monolith. It's been directly condemnatory, of course, or passively so by its silence. So really no aspect of the church can skate or be not guilty in this regard. And it's only been in the last few decades, in fact, where a few segments of the church has been more open, some quite actively more open. But that means that on this issue, and certainly some others, but certainly on this one, the church really does need to repent, actively so. You all know, I'm not going to say anything here that you all don't already know. The church has been a huge part of the problem. It's given a very powerful, something God-given excuse, even a mandate for discrimination against GLBTQ folks. It's used inflammatory language like abomination out of passage in the Old Testament that purports to be dealing with same-sex relationships. And we all know how dangerous the church and church people can be. Hopefully it does a great deal of good and has over the centuries, but it can be dangerous. And church folks, as we know, can be dangerous. In its more fundamentalist expressions, intolerance, in fact, is a virtue. That is, if one doesn't conform to that particular group's understanding of the world and God's demands, They feel quite justified then in doing you in or writing you out. When Ted Haggard or anyone else stands in the pulpit, and many do, condemning homosexuals, that's a violent act in my understanding of things. And how does he expect the church and others, speaking of Ted Haggard, in fact, how does he expect the church and others with whom he's been in bed, theologically, I mean, how does he expect them to act when he's found out? Well, just as they did. He's taught them well. Put on top of that a very vocal segment of the church that has been very willing to be used for national political ends. As we all know, it was no mistake that the definition of marriage amendments during the last presidential election were in very closely contested states in order to get out the fundamentalist religious vote. And it worked. Gay people, once again, became those that fed the flame of fear and intolerance. Of course, it's all more powerful because these are powerful institutions. But they also give rise to or legitimate zealous individuals who engage in hate crimes, who feel justified in beating up a gay person or verbally intimidating or simply being derisive. Now, one might say that those are individual acts, but when institutions, structures, and laws of society don't say otherwise, those individual acts have far greater power and, in fact, seem to be acting out the prevailing notion. Now, of course, the church can and has maintained that it's just following the Bible, but that is, in fact, a lie. Those 7 passages that purport to deal with homosexuality are treated far differently from many other texts in the Bible. There are numerous texts that are far less obscure than these that the church, even literal interpreters, have managed to quite nicely get around. You wonder, in fact, if there's something quite attractive, titillating perhaps, about these texts. And why is it that the dominant definition of sex is a sexual act for most of these groups? Look at one of the letters to the editor last night in last night's paper. It was a response to a very fine letter to the editor that was written by Reverend Bill Freeman. But this response to Bill's letter, the writer says that we, those of us who are not against GLBTQ folks, want to sweep sins into the closet. And then he names them sins: adultery, fornication, lechery, sodomy, lesbianism, homosexualism, lying are all sins, he says. But isn't it interesting that all of those but lying involve sex, and that the only two that are not biblical are lesbianism and homosexualism? And he left out greed, which is in that very text in the Bible, which is, of course, what our system of the economy is based on. In other words, these are very selective interpretations. Now, sometimes the church says that it acts righteously by saying that it hates the sin and loves the sinner. And sometimes they go on to say that we're all sinners. But this sin and this sinner, we all know, are seen and treated much differently than other sins like greed or the proud or those who are remarried, condemned by Jesus, by the way. And almost all churches, fortunately, have been able to get around that. And these folks are still labeled as sinners by the church. And there's nothing in the Bible anywhere that says love is a sin. Love between two people mutually expressed. The church that doesn't believe in this kind of way really needs to be far more vocal, because it's in many ways a part of the problem as well. Way too silent, and silence is taken as assent. That's why open and affirming, or the welcoming movements, they go by various names in different churches, are so important. This is when a church says that as a matter of congregational polity, it is open to, affirming of, and welcoming of LGBTQ folks, as they are, into the full life and ministry of the church. So certainly tolerance, which is what we're talking about tonight, is important, but we have a long way to go in that regard. But tolerance itself isn't enough. We need to be at full acceptance, and the church needs to make it clear that that is the dominant theology of the church and nothing else. Church's work really certainly does need to be in society. It needs to be within itself, and of course, it also needs to be in converting those who are so poorly grounded in their own faith or so poorly grounded in their own sexuality that anyone different from them is a threat. Thank you. I'll look forward to responding to questions.
Thank you, Doug. Randy?
Well, I get to follow the Reverend Van Doren, who's used to being constricted behind a mic. I'm more used to being on a whiteboard and pacing, so bear with me. 92% of hate crimes, as I've read, are perpetrated by males, and only 11% of those males are 30 years of age or greater, and they're mostly done in groups of males. And so what that tells me, it tells me a lot about some dynamics that go on in the male culture. I do a lot of work with violent masculinity, and I've worked with men in groups who've committed acts of domestic violence toward women and bar fights and such. And I sit with these guys and I ask myself, what happened to them? Why are they this way? And I can take a reductionistic point of view, kind of a biological point of view, and say they're born brutes and beasts and boys will be boys and this is kind of what we do. I don't believe that. I have a son, and he's a wonderful young man, very sensitive, very compassionate, and we've tried to preserve that in him. So what I understand hate crime to be is a function of toxic masculinity, of a socialization process that is dehumanizing for men and cuts them off from their soul. And the most egregious acts of violence are done by what I call people who are psychologically asthmatic. And that comes from James Garbarino's work, where he talks about there are social toxins in our culture, such as poverty and racism and such. And similar to there are toxins in the air, and that the physiologically asthmatic people become symptomatic from those toxins, where the other folks can walk in the air pollution and not be symptomatic and say, air pollution's no big deal. Well, I believe that the gender socialization of men is a toxin to their humanity and soul. The old school traditional view of masculinity, and this is where I wish I had a whiteboard. Imagine a box, and we say a real man is, or act like a man. What kind of adjectives do we put in there? Tough, strong, in control, macho, heterosexual. And then we put adjectives below, outside the box, that we would not put in a real man box, such as sensitive, caring, loving, cries, powerless, needs help, gay. And then what happens is when boys step out of that box, and you could go to any junior high in this city, and you'll hear these words, when boys step out of that box and act in ways that are dramatic or sensitive or affectionate, they get called the words fag, gay, sissy, girly, pussy, queer, and they're at risk of getting bullied and beat up. So there's a tremendous amount of pressure that is in the boy culture, as we call it, to conform to this narrow view of masculinity. And then what happens is, in this pressure, these guys are developing only half their humanity and trying to squash and cut off the side that I believe is the enemy of violence, which is empathy and compassion and love. So the marginalization of gay males for some males can lead an aggressive and even violent form. Crimes toward gay and lesbians are committed by predominantly young males and groups. So what you have in hate crime are young adult males anxious about their masculinity and consequently acting out their fears and anxiety onto others, including other males, in display of strength and dominance and bar fights and not backing down. Onto women and displays of superiority and control. And among gay males to validate their own gender and sexuality while punishing and marginalizing a gay male. The research I've done describes 3 different forms or underlying motivations for hate crimes, and I'm just going to list these 3, and I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to wrap it up after that, and maybe I'll have some more time later. The 3 are value-laden perpetration, socially motivated perpetration, and defensive and emotionally laden perpetration, and I'll briefly explain those 3. Value-laden perpetration is the motivation to restore our sense of what the natural order is and punish those for any deviation. So we saw that with the Ku Klux Klan, for example. These people weren't necessarily emotionally aroused, or it wasn't impulsive. It was premeditated, instrumental, and planned. There's not very much emotion involved. They are self-righteous, and they believe they need to punish people for being a deviation of the natural order. So they will actually go to places where they can find, like a prey upon, go to the gay districts, and they'll find people, and that's when you'll see hate crimes from those folks, from the value-laden perpetration. The second one is the socially motivated perpetration, and this helps to bond the attacking persons or the perpetrators and conforms placement as in the in-group while targeting GLBTs as the out group of the social group. So it's a ways for, in a kind of real toxic and demented way, for males to bond. And you see this in males getting together at strip clubs and bonding while they're objectifying women. If you remember the 1989 Glen Ridge rape in New Jersey, where normal, athletic, socialized boys raped a retarded young lady in the basement of their suburban home. Normal boys. And the last one is defensive and emotionally laden perpetration. And these are attacking and punish a person that reflects or symbolizes unacceptable aspects of myself, such as my effeminance, such as my desire to be affectionate toward the same-sex person. I have these urges inside me, and I split them off from me and deny them and push them down because I'm afraid as hell at what that means in my life, in my integration to my family, in my society, in my church. So I split them off and deny them. And then when I see them in someone else through some kind of projection process, it elicits tremendous fear and shame in me. I don't know what's going on in me, so I think it's because of that person. And in an affective violence, emotional rage they perpetrate. Those episodes of violence tend to be more often impulsive and spontaneous. The socially motivated perpetration tends to be opportunistic, and the value-laden perpetration tends to be premeditated. So we can elaborate more on some of this later on. I also want to thank you, Kim, for inviting me here, and I did enjoy your video installation. That was yesterday.
Thank you very much, Randy. And from yet another point of view, Chris Yerritt. Chris.
Thank you. Good evening. I thought I would let me know, is this loud enough? Yes? Okay. More? Okay. I wanted to start with just giving you a sense of, as an attorney, how these cases come to me, and I guess maybe to focus a little on the employment issue, because I get cases where people come in and they've either lost a job or they've been harassed in their job because of their sexual orientation. And just to give you an idea of what kinds of things happen and then what options there are as an attorney to take in West Michigan. First, I'll just go through a small list of some things. This would be like in the last couple of years, and these are West Michigan employers and people coming in, and these are the issues they've had. One would be the things you'd expect. A lot of the verbal, whether it's the name calling, whether it's the fag, the name calling, writing things on someone's graffiti on their car, something left at their desk, those kinds of things that you'd probably expect. Other things, I've had one case where it was a retail establishment locally, and the person working there he's a male, had a male partner, and he dropped him off for work and gave him a kiss as he dropped him off, and a customer saw that and complained, and the person lost his job. Another case, someone was being harassed. It went to the extent of he came to work one day and found a dead mouse in his wastebasket. And of course, the mouse itself, no significance to being gay, but all of the comments that built up to that, it was very clear what was going on and what the message was. Another case where a man working in an office setting, and again, different teasing comments, and they left on his desk a pink razor, like a woman's razor to shave with. Again, the message going back to what you're saying as far as kind of the pink and being feminine and that type of thing. And then another issue that came up too is, and as you know, today with the internet, and we all have to be careful what we put on the internet. With people who go online to date, and when they do that, they create a portrait for themselves online. And in one company, and this was a higher ed institution, and talking about a professor, and another professor somehow found out his portrait. He didn't use his own name, and then spread that across in a very conservative school. And so again, and of course those portraits can be very personal, and so it says a lot of things that you didn't expect to be sent around, and certainly being sent around in that way, the implication was much more serious. Now, when these things happen, as many of you know, we don't have any anti-discrimination laws in our country federal laws. We don't have an anti-discrimination federally that says you cannot discriminate in the workplace against your employer. Many states have them. Michigan does not. So we don't have any Michigan law to go by. So what I'm left with is some companies they'll have their general anti-discrimination law that they have, or I should say policy for their company. We don't discriminate based on race, religion. Well, some of them have added sexual orientation or gender identity. So if I have that gives me a basis to work to start with that company to say you're violating this. Many don't have that, of course. More don't than do. And then what I'm left with is basically trying to get the company's attention under the idea. I can certainly say that we would pursue a lawsuit, we would pursue our legal remedies. Right now, there's not a law we can sue under, but a lawyer can always hope to change the law. So you could argue, legitimately that, there's different equal protection laws that should apply, or different constitutional provisions. And so basically you're writing to the company to try to get their attention, and basically the issue for them is money. What's it going to cost? Is it worth it to defend it? Possible publicity. Is there someone who might be willing to go public? And if they do we want that mess? And I think decency. I think there's employers who where this happens, they don't like that it happened, and they want to take care of it. And usually the taking care of, though, is paying the person money. It's not giving them their job back. And often it's hard, because how do you undo that? And if they're in that environment, the employer might want to do something good, but they can't take away that atmosphere that person works in. So the loss of employment always typically comes with that. And so that's kind of where the state of the law is. In terms of what I think that all of us can do, and again, I'll focus on West Michigan. Wherever you work, that's certainly a small step you can take, is look at your policy, your handbook for your company, see if they've extended it to sexual orientation, and if they haven't, if you're willing to speak up on that. Many larger employers now have groups where they get together. A group of, like Grand Valley, I know, had a teachers, professors organization, people who are gay or interested in equality, and then they get together and go to the administration or go to the CEO and say, we think that this should happen. And it can take years. It does take years. But if you can get that, and you're just saying that we won't discriminate based on sexual orientation, that's huge. Another issue would be in your diversity training. Again, many companies, municipalities have diversity training, and the issue becomes, are they including sexual orientation first, And then secondly, if they are, who's doing it? And so, again, if it's somebody who does other types of diversity training and then they're throwing in sexual orientation here and there, it really might not be, what we really need. And so, again, and certainly that's where someone like, Sean and Triangle Foundation, thank you, comes into play, that they can offer resources and they'll go out and help train. So it's not even a matter of spending money for the company, it's a matter of hooking up with the right people and wanting to do that. And then I think just to mention it kind of, I guess, on the more personal basis, as far as, how do these things harm us? What kind of arguments can you make to people who don't really care about this issue, perhaps, or are more, because of their religion or whatever, are more negative on the issue? And certainly, I know, and I'd look to our Senator Craig from Utah as an incredible example of a situation where, I certainly, no one can judge someone else's sexual orientation, but I think a reasonable group of people looking at the facts of his life and what he's been, what people have said, would reasonably conclude that perhaps he is gay, or that he has, I don't know how else you can say it, that he's maybe bisexual or gay, whatever that is. And how sad that he's lived his life, not living that in open, and certainly his family, had to go through all this, and his wife and his kids, and they don't see him as being gay, and he may not see himself as being gay. But the harm then is that type of thing. So people come through marriages, and then all of a sudden they come out to themselves, and it took a long time because society was, pushing it down and saying it was wrong, or their church was telling him it was wrong. So there's those kinds of harms, to somebody who maybe doesn't care about the issue. Do they want their son or daughter to marry someone who's gay? And wouldn't they rather have them marry someone who's very clear on their sexual orientation? And the way we get to that is being open in our society. And so I think those kinds of examples. And then, and I was going to mention about the schools. I think, clearly that's another place where if you have kids in a school and you get involved in terms of trying to get the school's attention on teaching those issues. And I think there's no too young of an age. In kindergarten you start talking about how you treat people nicely, and you don't have to talk about even gay or straight or anything like that at that age. But if you continue that theme through elementary school, most elementary schools, the word gay is thrown around in a negative way. Like, that's so gay. So if the kids are hearing it, it's not going to, why can't you talk about it and say what it means, and then talk about, how to handle that situation. And then I also thought, just in terms of a personal challenge for all of us, and I know myself included, start with the history of when the AIDS, HIV first started coming to light in our country. It was called the gay cancer. It was in the 80s. And the slogan that came out was silence equals death. And the idea being, if we're not talking about it, if people aren't saying, I have this disease and I'm dying from it, if they're not going to the people, to the legislatures, et cetera, then the silence, leads to death, that you have to speak up to have change. And so I would say that that's probably the biggest thing each one of us can do as individuals, is to consider that idea, that certainly it could be an actual death in terms of a teen suicide or something like that, or a hate crime, someone beat up or killed, but more typically an emotional death, or some sort of a death that puts a person down in a significant way. And so I've heard, I don't know if you've ever heard Gloria Steinem speak. She's been in town a few times over the years, and she always talks about outrageous acts, and her talk will always end with, I want you to leave here to promise me that you'll, in the next 24 hours, engage in one outrageous act, in the furtherance of women's rights. And so I would leave you with that concept only, and maybe give you 48 hours. And it can be as simple as maybe just speaking up, as when in your family with the holidays coming up and there's the joke about, someone at the workplace, and there's a joke. And it's how we deal with our racism now, is people, if it's an all-white crowd, some people assume that that's fair game to speak up and say a racist joke. Well, it's very hard to speak up. It might be good at maybe just kind of staying quiet or giving them a bad look, but it's much harder to speak up. And so maybe to challenge yourself in that way to speak up. And then also, if you have children, to consider talking to those children about these issues. And I wanted to just end with my daughter's here. We went to Montgomery, Atlanta over the summer. We went to the Rosa Parks Library and Museum, and she picked out a button that says, "No child is born a racist." And I think that theme, clearly applies here. That children they're not born into this. Nobody's born into these kinds of ideas. And really, if we start with kids at a young age, we'll make a difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Chris. And I hope for all of the panelists that we can engage in a discussion about, as we talk about and feel the pain, about, yes, what can we do about this? And we're coming at it from a variety of points of view, as we have already heard. Speaking of that, I knew where the first three presenters were coming from. I have no idea where George Hartwell is coming from tonight, because he has several angles that he could come, whether it's government, whether it's as a minister, whether it's his specific ministry. And he also speaks for those of us who have lots of gray hair, if we have any hair at all, because he is the CEO of Pilgrim Manor Retirement Community. So, George, we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Dan. I guess I don't know what I'm going to say either. That's why I've got so much paper here. But let me make two slight additions to your introductory comments, because I'm very proud to be a member of Grand Rapids' other open and affirming UCC congregation, the East Congregational Church. And in spite of your kind comments about my role in the gender orientation ordinance in Grand Rapids, the truth of the matter is, while I championed that and introduced it, it lost in 1993. It lost on a 4-3 vote. And the gay and lesbian community got behind a candidate, Eric Williams, who was running in the 3rd Ward, an African American minister from a rather conservative church, and with the commitment that if he were elected, with the help of the community, that he would be the vote to pass this ordinance. And Eric was elected, and he was good to his word. And by June of the year that he was sworn in, 1994, we reintroduced the legislation, and it passed on a 4-3 vote. So the real credit goes to Eric Williams, and as a matter of fact, Eric was. It's fair to say that he was so hounded within the black faith community for that vote, and it was such a difficult experience for him that after one term on the city commission, he decided not to run again. A bit later, of course, there was an effort, a petition effort, to put the matter before the voters of the city of Grand Rapids, and I remember some wonderful meetings in the basement at Plymouth, or in the fellowship room at Plymouth Congregational Church, where we were fighting that effort. However, the collector of petitions, the organizer of this effort, secured all the signatures necessary to put it on the ballot, and he turned them in just before 4 o'clock on the day after the time had lapsed for that. He turned his signatures in a day late, and so of course it wasn't on the ballot, and nobody else has tried it since, so maybe I should be quiet. But it's a great history. Well, I'm going to try to just very briefly, probably with some help from Sean, talk a bit about the legislation behind law enforcement for hate crimes. Talk a little bit about the Grand Rapids experience with hate crimes and bias crimes. and then say just a bit perhaps about the atmosphere today around in this community, as I read it anyway, around intolerance. The federal legislation that would in 1994, Public Law 103-322 which defined hate crimes and included sexual orientation. If I'm correct on this, Sean, gave the trial judge the prerogative of adding to a sentence if in the judge's discretion it was motivated by bias, by hate. Is that?
Which law is that?
That's Public Act 103 of 1994.
I'm not familiar with that.
But it left it in the hands of the trial judge. Recently, and in fact, Sean corrected me tonight because I wasn't aware that it had passed in the Senate. But the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2007 has passed both House and Senate. And it includes sexual orientation, and it drops the prerequisite that the victim be engaged in a federally protected activity. So that means that it expands it more widely to any crime. But it is it has been generally expected that President Bush would, in fact, Bush had indicated that he would veto the legislation if it reached his desk. But Sean just told me that it was addended to the defense appropriations bill. Huh? That's smart. He's not going to veto the defense appropriations bill, is he?
Probably not.
Oh, yeah. You got to give some of these federal legislators some credit. In the state of Michigan, sexual orientation is not a protected category, and so whether it is in employment matters, such as Christine talked about, housing matters, public accommodation, even though the Grand Rapids charter includes now this ordinance protecting, identifying sexual orientation, or in our case, gender orientation, as a protected class. There is no enforcement mechanism at the local level. It's state enforcement mechanism, and so until Michigan has includes sexual orientation in its civil rights codes, it is there is literally no protection. Hate crimes in Michigan, there is no state enabling legislation. In fact, we are one, I believe, of only 19 states that do not have protections that don't have hate crime legislation on the state's books. And so this state once again proves itself to be rather backward. In Grand Rapids, and as the result of the Federal Uniform Crime Reporting Act, did I get that right, Sean?
Hate Crimes Statistics Act of 1990.
Hate Crime Statistics Act of 1990. Thank you. The states have to collect data on hate crimes, bias-related crimes. A definition of hate crime by statute is criminal offense committed against a person or property which is motivated in whole or in part by the offender's bias against race, religion, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, or disability group. In Grand Rapids, our police are told to report hate crimes, and they do report hate crimes. If in their opinion, the opinion of the arresting officer, hate was an element of that crime. It was motivated by hatred because of race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, ethnicity, age, then that is reported. And the most recent data that I have are the 2006 bias offenses, and in 2006 there were only of the 26 reported bias offenses in Grand Rapids, 4 were either in one of these categories: anti-male homosexual, anti-female homosexual, anti-homosexual.
For the
Other. And other biases such as AIDS. There were 4 in that category. In 2005, the report, the Grand Rapids report, shows that there were a total. I did bring too much paper. There were a total of about. It seems like it was 30-some hate crimes reported. 8 of those were in one of the categories I just mentioned: anti-male homosexual, anti-female homosexual, anti-homosexual, and there were none in that other category. There were 8 of the 8. There were 50 total in Grand Rapids. 5 of the 50, 8 were against were sexual orientation. 5 of those were non-aggravated assault. 2 were damage to property. 1 was aggravated assault. I don't know if that makes what conclusions to draw from that. What I do suspect is that there is a lot of bias crime that is not reported as such. There's a lot of hate motivated crime that goes unreported because the police don't check the box, or because the individuals are fearful of reporting that crime out of concern that of the effect that will have on their lives generally, on their employment, on their family, and so those crimes go. The crimes oftentimes go unreported, and even if reported, the police may not identify them as hate crimes. I think, having said enough of that, let me just kind of conclude by saying that I believe that there is a rather remarkable shift going on in Grand Rapids. I mean, I've lived here almost all my life. Came here as an infant, and other than 5 years in Traverse City and a year in Detroit, I've lived here all my life. Grand Rapids today is indeed a more open community than it was when I was growing up as a child, but as the community changes, as we become a more progressive community, as the demographic changes, as attitudes begin to change, there is an enormous pushback. There's friction that's created around that change because of the fear that people have of change. So the old conservative Grand Rapids is pushing back hard. Some of that, I believe, actually does get manifested in hate crime, but most of it is ever so much more subtle and therefore insidious, and it's built into the community. We saw it so apparently when Corpus Christi played at the Actors Theater in the Spectrum Theater, and the explosive nature of that and the pushback from the conservative community, much of it the conservative faith community that couldn't stand to see Jesus cast as a gay man, and so now, what was that, Fred? 3 years ago or 4? 3 years ago? 4 years ago. Now this year, we just finished the wonderful play, the name of which is escaping me. Thank you. And perhaps it was the way it was handled. The faith community, even the conservative faith community, invited in for conversations about the issues raised in this play about gay Christians, and we saw. I think it had the same potential for explosiveness that Corpus Christi had. But we didn't see it. The community wrestled with it, I think, much better. So maybe I'm just talking like a mayor here, but I think that there's signs of hopefulness today, and reasons for us to believe that we're getting through this time of tension and angst, and that we're moving toward a better, more open and inclusive and progressive time in our city's history. So I'll let you poke holes in my balloon in a few minutes, but I want to be encouraged today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And while we're listening to our next presenter, some of you can be taking notes for our Meet the Mayor segment, and you can come to the microphone and help him out. Sean, we welcome your viewpoints. Sean comes to us from Detroit in the Triangle Foundation.
Thank you very much. How are y'all doing today? Good. Let's make sure we're all here and present. I also want to thank Kim and the amazing art installation that she did. I went to the Open Concepts Gallery, and it was an amazing thing to see. So for those of you that have not gone to see this yet, make sure you do it. I'm going to insist that she bring this all over the state, whether we can pay for it or not. A lot of people need to see this art installation. So first things first, Triangle Foundation is a statewide civil rights advocacy and anti-violence organization. We've been around since 1991, and one of the main things we do, one of the founding programs that we offered, is an anti-violence project. So if something happens to you in the state of Michigan and you feel like you've been the victim of discrimination, intimidation, harassment, vandalism, or violence, you can contact Triangle Foundation. We'll do direct referrals, direct assistance, advocacy, everything from helping you fill out a personal protection order to watching your case go to trial, anything at all. We have 2 full-time staff doing that in our state, and Colette, who's on our staff, is also taking personal. If you have an incident that happens in West Michigan, she'll be your first point of contact on incidents that happen in West Michigan. One of the reasons why Triangle Foundation formed is that our executive director, Jeff Montgomery, his partner had been murdered, and the police did nothing about it. In fact, they called it just another gay killing. And one of the reasons why Triangle Foundation formed is that the natural and normal places you would go to report crime or deal with your rights were not there. They were not there for gay and lesbian people or bisexual and transgender people. And many minority groups have always felt like the traditional systems that are in place to help you just do not serve you at all. So we formed an organization to do that. Interestingly, most minority groups in this country rely on government data for the hate crime data. One of the only movements, I believe the only movement in the country tracking its own data is the gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community through a national coalition of anti-violence programs. Triangle Foundation is one of the founding members from 1991, 1992 of that national coalition. And one of the reasons why we were doing that, and it's interesting, in the Justice Department, as Mayor Hartwell was talking about how the Hate Crimes Statistics Act of 1990 requires that all local law enforcement agencies around the country track hate crimes. If an incident happens, just check whether it's biased or not. Most law enforcement agencies aren't doing it. For those that are, they haven't been trained. Most have not been trained. So stealing my rainbow flag off my house might get marked down as vandalism instead of a hate crime. And so it's not that they want my rainbow flag, they want me not to have my rainbow flag, and that's a very, very different kind of crime. And so we're trying to track all this stuff. But as the numbers trickle up, the Justice Department staff would frequently call their hate crime report the Book of Zeros, because they know that these numbers are not actually trickling up. And so in the year that Matthew Shepard was killed, the gay college student in Wyoming, in the narrow category of homicide, the Justice Department report said that there was 1 anti-gay killing that year. Our numbers alone, just in homicide, showed 33 anti-gay killings in 1998. So it just shows that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in tracking accurate numbers. I'm glad the numbers in Grand Rapids are what they are, but that's probably just reported incidents, and that a lot of folks, especially men, tend to not report crime, let alone violent crime. So we know that the numbers may be higher in every community. One thing I'll say about anti-gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender hate violence, which I'm not sure if this is the case for other minority groups, but for gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people, or those who are perceived to be, most of the hate violence that happens to us or discrimination that happens to us tends to be around the workplace or around the home. It's not leaving a gay club. It's not at a gay pride festival. It's someone in the next cubicle who puts up a biblical verse and then begins harassing you and then knifes your tire, or it's the kid 3 houses down in your community that begins to just harass you and taunt you. That's usually where we see this happening at. And it's very difficult because as a condition of your employment, you must show up all the time and be next to your offender. As a condition of being a student in school, you must show up every day next to the bully. And as a condition of your mortgage or your rent that you're in, a lease that you're in, you must constantly be next to your offender. So in many cases, hate violence is a very, very real and pervasive problem for folks surviving it and going through it. I will say that hate violence is different than all other forms of crime. Many forms of crime are unique, but hate violence is exceptionally unique. One of the things that makes hate violence unique is the fact that it's exceptionally violent. Many in law enforcement know that we in the hate crimes community refer to a hate crime. The language we use in it is typically that something is overkill. It's not just 5 or 6 stab wounds or bullet holes or whatever. It's excessive violence. I've seen police officers arrive at the scene of a male victim of hate violence saying either this guy slept with someone's girlfriend or this was a hate crime, because the level of violence exacted in this crime shows the amount of hatred for this victim. There was a case in Japan years ago of a U.S. service member serving in Japan who was followed into a bathroom. His name was Barry Schindler. And these 2 other American service members followed him into a bathroom and proceeded to just decimate this guy's body. They crushed his skull. They kicked a hole straight through his body so you could see right through him. They crushed his neck. They cut off his penis and flushed it down the toilet seat. Police likened his attack to someone being trampled by a horse. That's how bad it was. His mother couldn't identify him by tattoo or dental records for 2 weeks. So the level of violence that exists in a hate crime tends to be excessive. When we work with law enforcement, we try to train them about how to look out for those kinds of signs. Another thing that makes hate violence different than other forms of crime is the fact that not only is it targeting a particular group, but it's based on profiling. So I think this person's Jewish, I think this person's Arab, I think this person's gay. So many people are the victims of hate violence who aren't actually part of the group, which is another reason why entire communities need to be vigilant against hate violence, because entire populations of people who have been profiled or stopped or searched at the airport because they look like they're Muslim, or not that it's okay anyway, but entire populations of people are affected when we profile and when we act out against minority groups. Another thing that makes hate violence different than all other forms of crime is the fact that it punishes an entire community. We're all hearing about these news cases all over the country right now, in Gina and in other places around the country. If any of you came home and saw this plastic cup on fire on your lawn, you'd be like, oh, there's a flaming cup on my lawn. You'd probably hose it off and put it away. But if this thing that was on fire on your lawn was a cross, same thing, right? Something on fire on your lawn, but a different message is being sent, isn't it? It's being sent that people like you, or people who sympathize with people like you, aren't welcome here. And next it's your kid, next it's your house. It's a form of terrorism. Hate violence is a form of terrorism. It punishes an entire community, and it sends a message that you better get out of here. So that's another reason why it's different. But the number one reason why hate violence is different than all other forms of crime is personal gain. If you speed to work, you get there on time. If I steal your purse, I now have your purse. And a fabulous purse it is. But if you commit a hate crime, you are doing it because you are purely trying to victimize the victim. In Matthew Shepard's case in Wyoming, they also took his wallet and his shoes. But is that why they did it? No. And it's because it is a form of humiliation. It is a form of beating the black, beating the gay, beating the Jew out of a particular person. That is absolutely, there's a psychological component to that. And unfortunately, law enforcement sometimes will say, oh, that was a robbery, aggravated robbery. We really know that that isn't. It takes the vigilance of an anti-violence project or a Triangle Foundation or a very good police department to get to the bottom of really what the motivation was. Hate crimes can sometimes be predicted. If at 3 o'clock, after school lets out, rainbow flags are being torn off people's houses and there's a school a block away, you might be able to predict what's happening tomorrow or the day after. So if you train law enforcement, you can actually sometimes predict hate violence and hate crimes. I'll also say that I think several of the comments that have been made on this panel so far are right on when it comes to comments that are made about gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. Homophobia is a tool of sexism. Sexism, homophobia would not exist if sexism did not exist. It is about the attitudes we have about women, the attitudes we have about men, their proper role sexually, their proper role gender-wise, and their proper role in a relationship. There's a reason why nearly every anti-gay term, every slur out there, none of them are positive, and all of them for gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people deal with femininity, masculinity, or sexual acts, because they're all negative. And that is telling us something about the social norms and what is expected of men and women when these terms like sissy, queen, flamer, wimp, I'm a firm believer that wimp and sissy are anti-gay terms. And these are all words we're hearing, and all equally masculinizing terms against lesbian women. And I'm a firm believer also that Hillary Clinton is going to be subjected to even more of this in the next presidential cycle, because she's a strong woman, she's an educated woman, and she's a forceful woman. And she's also seen as many as a hawk militarily. And she's going to be called a lot of negative things because of that those positions that she has. One last thing that I'll talk about, because I know we have more comments to do later, and I'm on a roll.
Yes, you are.
Is hate crime laws. Just to go over hate crime laws again really quickly. Mayor Hartwell's correct. There used to be, I believe this public act you're talking about, which I'm not familiar with, instructed judges that they're allowed to enhance penalties. There has been a Supreme Court justice ruling since then saying that penalty enhancement through hate crime laws can only be done by a jury. So there is a Supreme Court case from 4 or 5 years ago that now only juries can enhance penalties by a year or two. Virtually all the hate crime laws that exist at the state level are penalty enhancement laws, which means you have to be charged with the first offense initially, which is arson or assault or something like that. And then a prosecutor can ask the jury, enhance this penalty, add a year or two, because we think this is exceptionally bad. It's a bargaining chip for prosecutors. If you commit a crime on federal property, they enhance the penalty. If you commit a crime against a police officer, they enhance the penalty. If you commit a crime with an assault weapon, they enhance the penalty. It's the same kind of thinking that certain crimes are more intolerant in our community, therefore we want to enhance the penalty. So that's what state hate crime laws do. The Hate Crimes Statistics Act of 1990 does require that local agencies track them. And as Mayor Hartwell said, we just had legislation pass the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, and it was attached to the Department of Defense budget. So hopefully President Bush will not veto it, even though he had promised he would. And this will add vital categories to federal hate crime laws. So if a local law enforcement agency is not doing their job, if they're not investigating, or they don't have the resources to investigate and prosecute a local hate crime, the federal government can come in and provide the necessary staff, money, resources, and other materials needed to prosecute a local hate crime. It does give it federal jurisdiction. Michigan's hate crime law, for those of you that don't know, is called the Ethnic Intimidation Act of 1988. Ironically, it was introduced in 1987 by a Republican, David Honigman, in our state legislature. It had sexual orientation in it, passed the House with flying colors, went to the Senate, sat there for a year and a half, and on the last day of session in 1988, then Senate Majority Leader John Engler, maybe you've heard of him. He's on that wall over there in case he's conveniently behind that thing of water. How convenient. So he's kind of like, so I can talk about him. He and then Judiciary Chair Rudy Nichols, now judge in Oakland County, Rudy Nichols, crossed off two very important words in that bill, sexual orientation, and it became law, and they changed the name of it from the Hate Crimes Act to the Ethnic Intimidation Act. Even though it includes sex and religion, gender and religion, it's called the Ethnic Intimidation Act. And so if you burn down my house because I'm white, you might see a hate crime charge in addition to the arson charge. But if you burn down my house because I'm gay or because you think I'm gay, there is no hate crime charge at all. And that's the reality for 20 years now, 19 years, that we've been living with our hate crime statute. So that's where I'll end. There's more to talk about, but I'll wait till the second round, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean, and all of our panelists. The second round is here because I would invite the panelists on their own to engage one another or to follow up with additional information. I'm intrigued by some of the steps that Chris outlined of things we can do. And then as I listen to the mayor and to Sean talk about the legislation, you get a little bit discouraged about what's out there. So I'd certainly welcome hearing more about that. But Randy, you also said you had some things to add. So I'll throw it open to anyone who would care to jump in or ask one another questions.
Well, I'll just say a little bit about how this affects us from my perspective. I think some of the panelists have already discussed some of these. The obvious is that it hurts and kills individuals. Hate crime does. And then the gender straitjackets that we live in, males and females, squash and constrict the humanity of individuals. For example, males and females under societal pressure deny their individuality to fit into the gender box. And so there's a lot of our humanity that gets eliminated, squashed because of these gender boxes that we live in. And I think that GLBTs also are encouraged to live in the closet out of fear, and resulting in limited role modeling of diverse masculinity and committed affectional relationships. And I think that that's part of the shame, is that we don't see the diversity because of the fear that hate crime creates. So those are some of the things I wanted to add about the impact that this has on our humanity and relationships.
Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to maybe throw out to the audience is just, kind of get some input on, like for their own lives, whether it's through the workplace or with their family, what you see as when you're talking to people or dealing with people who are, opposing, whether it's teaching about, sexual orientation tolerance in the schools or at work, what are the obstacles that you see, or have you had any experiences like that, or anything that's worked for you in terms of getting anyone's attention?
I would welcome folks to come forward in a minute. I have one more thing I would like to press on comments, because we've heard from Chris and Sean particularly about what we can do from the mayor on what we are doing. But both of our ordained ministers talk about the clear problems with the faith community. Doug very directly, and George when talking about Eric Williams and his difficulties in the black faith community. One of the things that most despairing to me as a member of a Christian church and someone who's striving to be a Christian are to feel like you're fighting uphill so much against just about everybody else in the community. What do we do about that?
I think one of the things is we become much more vocal than we have been. We've allowed West Michigan to get away with thinking that it's a very conservative community, and it is not nearly as conservative as it used to be, and as some people would like it to be made out to be. So what happens is that progressive folks or liberal folks on this and a number of issues don't speak, because we assume that everybody's going to be against what we have to say. Folks that are on the other side of many issues than we are, for lack of a better term right now, conservative folks, at least on this issue, do talk, and talk especially out of religious traditions as if the whole community is with them. They speak with the voice of the majority, and so it just perpetuates the myth, which I think is in many ways a myth. So what happens, and an awful lot of folks that I know, and certainly people in the congregation that I serve, find when they speak, others who they had no idea, didn't believe it would be the case. A lot of other people say, well, yeah, I agree with you. But until we find our voice, then other people don't find their voices either. So I think, one of them, now, again, I speak that, as a straight white male, and I realize that there is a very different reality for folks against whom hate crimes are often perpetuated. So I'm not saying that on behalf of people of color or gay folks that they should out themselves, but I think straight folks need where we can, and in many places, to be far, far, far more out there than we are now. Far more. And I think we'll find that there is much, much more support. And at least we don't let people get away with speaking for the whole community. When stuff was going on about 10 years ago, and with Jerry Crane and Byron Center and so forth, that when Concerned Clergy formed, the letters to the editor in the Grand Rapids Press were written from the voice. When they were against the gay folks, they were written as if they were the majority. It was very clear that the voice was from the majority. But after a couple years' work, a number of letters to the editor, a number of workshops, all kinds of things, those folks began writing from the voice of of the minority. They felt themselves, they were more vociferous, interestingly, as is the case with those, but they felt themselves to be not necessarily the norm. It was a huge difference, great progress, when a number of people spoke out, and I'm sure they weren't aware that they were not speaking as if they were speaking on behalf of the whole community, but they certainly were. The change was dramatic, and I think that's one of the things that we need to do, and we need to do what was done by the video and by the 7 passages. We need to hear gay folks' stories, like with everything else. I mean, we need to, in our own words, was the language of the 7 passages, and I think that's just critically important. So with that, I'll shut up.
Well, I'll only add that you mix a little religiosity into the psychological dysfunction that Randy talked about, and
scary.
And it's scary as hell, isn't it? It truly is. But again, I'll sound a note of encouragement. There's a pitched battle going on in the church today, and it's resulting in movement. It's been largely resolved in the United Church of Christ. It's a live debate in the United Methodist Church. It's a live debate in the Episcopal Church, and perhaps others that I'm not thinking of. But that debate wouldn't have even happened a decade ago, 2 decades ago. So the very fact that the church is in it, at least in its mainline manifestations, coming to grips with the whole question of homosexuality and faith is, in my view of things, encouraging. It's movement in the right direction.
I'll also add that I say this all the time, and Colette's probably heard me say this 4,000 times, but it's such a great quote that I always want to say it. When Ralph Reed stepped down from the Christian Coalition, I think it was in 1998, he said, he's this brilliant political strategist, only when he wins. When he loses, he's not so brilliant. But he said, any Christian conservative organization that makes anti-gay work the center of their work will fail. The gay and lesbian movement, civil rights movement, is an unstoppable train. People are coming out in record numbers, and you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. And what's happening in this country is that because of TV and culture and the internet and all these different things, I believe that that's absolutely true. And so that it is amazing how we are presented with this opportunity right now in the faith community that people are not going to go back in the closet no matter how hard people try, and that gives us an excellent opportunity. I want to say one other thing about what was said earlier about the love the sinner, hate the sin mentality, and these people really do hate us. This isn't like I love the sinner, hate. They really hate us. Or else, where would be the ballot measure? There's a ballot measure to ban gay marriage, but where's the ballot measure to ban divorce, or the ballot measure to ban murder, or the ballot measure to ban arson? This is exactly calculated to turn out conservative voters because they don't like us. And so anyone who tells you, I love the sinner, hate the sin, this is garbage. And so there may be some folks who really have convinced themselves that that's what they believe, but challenge them on that, because their actions, usually those that are on the fringe, those that would open up our state constitution to write social policy into it, those that would open up our United States Constitution, as they did with Prohibition, to write social policy into it, are on the fringe and are not looking out for the best interest of this community or this country. So.
One other thing, if I might add, Dan, I think an approach for the church that has some potential is the question of civil rights, of looking at this issue as a civil rights issue, and the church has a rich tradition in the civil rights movement in this country, and there are churches, conservative churches like the Reformed Church in America, our Dutch Reformed Church, that has in its social statements, I forget what those things are called. I used to be a member of that church, but that while it continues to call homosexuality sin, it says that we need to stand with and speak out for the civil rights. Actually, I think it says the human rights of gay and lesbian people. So there's at least a an opening, and even in some of the more conservative faith professions, to be able to push along the lines of civil rights.
So, thank you. Chris Yarrett had issued an invitation to the audience to provide input on the issues of housing, company rules, and the like. Kim, while you're right there, because we have so many people here, they may not feel like falling over one another. So if somebody raises their hand, perhaps we could take the mic to them to facilitate the process. We certainly would welcome that input. And don't forget the mayor had some challenges. He's seeing the glass is half full. Do you think he's full of whatever, or do you want to take him on about that?
First of all, all the panelists are terrific, and this is a really important event. I want to thank Christine for invoking another sage in telling us that we need to get out and challenge things where we live, where we work on a day-to-day basis. But it's easier said than done. Fortunately, I discovered just this past year a wonderful tool. And if you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center website, they have online a downloadable 90-page document. It's something, I forget what it's called. It's basically Speak Out or Speak. And it's from an education perspective, it talks about how to challenge any kind of comment, whether it's a sexist comment or a racist comment or a heterosexist comment, and gives you examples and dialogue so you can actually practice that. So if you're feeling weak in the knees and you're really upset with yourself and it happened, just last week at work somebody said something, I couldn't stand up, and I'm kicking myself, this is where you go to get the ammunition, the words, the tools to do it. It's on the Southern Poverty Law Center website, and as a teacher,
which I believe is splcenter.org, correct?
Other folks.
Okay, I have to admit I'm a plant from Triangle Foundation, but I have to take Chris up on her challenge and say if you want something really easy to do, I have Safe Schools cards here that are available for you to sign to help us pass Matt's Safe School bill, which we got through the House and now we need to get it through the Senate, and it will make school safe for all kids. It will specifically enumerate sexual orientation and gender identity. So please catch one before you leave and help us pass that into law.
Folks, Sean was referring to Colette over here and pointing this way. This is Colette, and she's helping us in West Michigan.
Yeah, Colette is our West Michigan field organizer, the fabulous, our first ever West Michigan field organizer. And I'll also say about that legislation, I was supposed to introduce Colette to talk about that, but I'm sorry, Colette. Oh my gosh, she's so outgoing. I will say that the Matt's Safe Schools law, which is House Bill 4162 and 4091, which is enumerated on that card, has already passed the Michigan House of Representatives. And there were state legislators in West Michigan who supported this legislation, including Mary Valentine from the Muskegon County area and Robert Dean, a state representative from this community. Mike Sack, another representative from this area, did not support that bill. Do with that information what you like. And also, the state senator who chairs the committee in the Senate who governs this legislation is Wayne Kuipers from Ottawa County, and he has since refused to let this bill come out of committee. He told some families and myself 2 years ago that as long as sexual orientation is in the anti-bullying bill, he will not move it out of committee. Yeah. So anyone who lives in his district or does business in his district, owns property in his district, or shops in his district, please contact Senator Wayne Kuipers and encourage him to move this legislation.
Profile encourage. I might add that Mary Valentine and Bob Dean are both threatened with recall right now, the recall petitions that are circulating. Kuipers
is also being recalled.
Pardon me?
Kuipers is also being recalled.
Yeah. Except that Kuipers is now championing the repeal bill, running as fast as he can to try to get away from his previous vote. So, don't sign the petitions and give Mary and Bob some help.
Thank you, folks. Again, we welcome your input, or if you would like. We have somebody right there on the other side of the post, Kim.
I wonder if any of the panel would just talk about the economic issue that if gay and lesbian people are not welcome then they often leave the community, leave the state at a time when especially this state is desperate to keep the best and the brightest with us and working in the communities. And I think many of us, perhaps I certainly know of several gay and lesbian people who have left the state of Michigan and the city of Grand Rapids and their employment here and moved to states and cities that were more comfortable and welcoming. And what does that mean overall to the economic recovery and the quality of life of Grand Rapids and Michigan?
One of the most important voices in recent years on that very score was Richard Florida, and in the book Rise of the Creative Class, he specifically states that the communities that will be the winners, the cities that will be the winners, the states that will be the winners are those communities that are open and inviting. And he comes right out and says it. You simply have to be open and inviting to the gay community. You've got to have young, creative people, whether they're gay or straight. When they see that you are a closed community, they're going to Portland. They're going to Austin. They're going someplace other than to Grand Rapids. And so it's critical to our economic growth and development that we be the open and inviting community, welcoming community that Florida describes and that Fred Cebulski has just described.
I'll also say that in the state of Colorado in 1992, they passed a statewide law called Amendment 2 that banned gay rights in the entire state. That was later struck down in Romer v. Evans in 1996. But that statewide law, there was a boycott on the state of Colorado, which cost the state tens of millions of dollars. And the only other community in the state that did that was Cincinnati, and they were also faced with a major boycott. Erecting barriers to communities to want to stay, do business, start a family, start a community, anything they want to, it really does hurt the economy. And it's as if the right wing wants to see this state close and become more like Mississippi than Michigan. After erecting a ban to gay marriage, erecting a ban to affirmative action, erecting all these different bans to our state, it's like, if you don't look like us, you don't talk like us, we don't want you here. And if that's what folks want, we have to fight that with all our might, because we're not going to be left with a community that is has nothing left to offer, both for our state's number one industry, which is tourism, but also for the communities that live in this state. So I will say that. There's also research out there to show that if you were to legalize same-sex marriage in this country, it would provide $1 billion in new revenue in this country. That is not including, a friend of mine testified at the marriage hearings in the state of Michigan and said, at a wedding, everyone's happy, right? The florist is happy. The photographer's happy. The people who own the hall is happy. Everyone's getting paid. Weddings, marriages, it churns the economy. And not only is stopping gay marriages and gay ceremonies pushing them elsewhere, whether it's Canada, Massachusetts, wherever, but it is eliminating people who have to stay on government assistance because they can't be on their partner's health insurance. All this different stuff costs us dearly when we don't legalize equality.
Jim, David has a comment.
There's certainly a lot of legal issues that need to be addressed, but when Randy was speaking, my heart just sank because I know the whole socialization issue for children, especially teenagers, and the socialization that goes on in churches. I mean, we're still socializing adults. I mean, we're changing attitudes, unfortunately, in a very negative way with a lot of this effort that's going on. And I just would like you to speak a little bit more to that culture of violence that, from the president on down, we have a culture of fear and violence. And how do we deal with that?
Very simply, no. Point A, B, and C. No, that certainly is my passion for prevention work in terms of looking at talking to churches and working with schools and athletic programs about the socialization of boys. And I think that the women's movement has made some ground in being able to expand their experience in their humanity, but there's not very many men out in the streets burning their jock straps and saying this traditional masculinity is dehumanizing to me, because there's so much privilege that comes with it, and that's why there's a lot of men that buy into it. There's a lot of privilege and power buying into the patriarchal system. But I think once some of us men that perhaps have a different viewpoint speak up and stand up to that ideology, I think that's going to start making some slow shifts. And working with schools on the bullying issue, for example, working with athletic programs on the hypermasculinity that's proliferated in that area. Like I said, have a young son. I mean, now he's 18 now. I'm hanging on. He plays football, but he also does ballet and theater and such. But when he continues to play football. But he has had some really awful experiences in that process. One time he was hugging me as we were in line signing up for Rocket football. One of the coaches says, if you're going to hug like that on my team, you'll be sitting the bench. He kissed his mom in junior high football before she was going away for the weekend, and the football coach called him a titty baby for the rest of the season. So there's so much work to be done in the areas of sports, and it's just incredible, but we got to keep moving forward.
Can I ask, are you able to get the school, when it happened, were you able to get the school's attention to deal with the coaches?
He doesn't coach anymore in that rec department.
Good.
I make sure of that.
I'll say also on that matter that it's not just about the comments we hear. It's like it's about challenging oppression every single time you see it. It's not just about, this is about size acceptance. It's about gender acceptance. It's about all this stuff. We had a woman who used to work for us open my eyes immensely about the oppression that is exacted against people in our society because of their size. And if we're going to talk about silent realities going on in a room and the way people behave in a meeting and the comments we use and the things we say, it's creating as many opportunities as possible for people to feel safe challenging those kinds of words, not leaving it up to that kid or someone in authority to stick up for that young person. It's about letting it be known on the first day of any experience you have. Our experience has always been with bullying that young people believe overwhelmingly that it's still okay to bully people because they're fat, because they're mentally ill, or because they're gay. And if someone stands up on the first day of school and says, I will not tolerate in this classroom any time this year you making any comments about people because of their size, because of their sexuality, or because of their ability in school, that kids are like, wow, I thought everyone teased those kinds of people, and someone just told me that that's not okay. It's amazing. It creates this a very good chilling effect on hate speech in our schools. And I really think that people in authority, anyone, we have so many times where people are just opinionless about this stuff. And if someone close to them says, I don't tolerate that, it just reverberates in our community. So it's not just about calling it out when you're in a position of authority. We have so many times throughout the day that we could say that simple words like wimp and sissy and any dehumanizing language that vilifies people for being like a woman or vilifies someone for being anything other than the norm has to be challenged.
Thank you, Sean.
I would like to add that Daniel Oyes from Sweden, he kind of pioneered the bystander model of anti-bullying initiatives. And the notion is that you educate, in any given school, 20% are involved in bullying. But he says you educate the 80% that aren't involved, and they police the kids and create different norms in that culture, rather than a binary model where you get administration and teachers to kind of use punitive measures. That research suggests that doesn't work. So it's educating the powerful, positive peers.
We have another session scheduled coming right up where we can talk more one-on-one, but there's a lady who's been waiting very patiently with a microphone for one more comment or question. Please.
Not really anymore, because he said everything that I was going to say, but nevertheless, it made me extremely mad. Just plain mad when I saw what happens and how these children have to explain themselves for who they are. And I thought, and I'm from a Dutch Reformed church, and I'm just so angry. It just seems like this is not right. Here, our law is love your neighbor as yourself. And boy, when it comes up, they're going to hear me, because these kids, they're just wonderful. We have a grandson who came out now. Well, does he really need to come out of a closet? You know, a fine young man, so loving and so kind, and he's marked. You know, I just cannot get over that. How really inside, how upset I am. But then again, you know, this is, in a way, it is new to us. In a way, it is not. I've talked to a nephew in the Netherlands who is, and he you know, we have a good dialogue going. So I'm well informed, and I hope to really work along these lines and be very supportive.
We heard a lot of theories. However, the fact remains that when you are gay or lesbian, you are different. And we all know when you are different, you will attract attention. That is a human thing that's born into us. We are always attracted to those things which are different. If I talk to a person who is, let's say, gay, my first thought is, hey, you're different. Which is acceptable. I have no problem with that. My second thought when I look at him is, do I like it? And I think that many of us, with the greatest part of society, we say, no, I don't like that. Why I'm saying that, I don't know. Maybe that's also a born-in instinct. Maybe I have obtained this through society. But that's how I believe most of us look at it. Now, is it wrong that I think, no, I don't like it? It is wrong to look at him or her and say, I hate you because of that. That's wrong. I think that's what the church is saying. That's wrong. No church says, as was kind of implied there, that that's right. The churches don't say that. Society doesn't even say that. Maybe 1%, 2% of society. But generally, society doesn't say that. I don't think that's their big problem. Their big problem is when I think I don't like it. I don't like you. I want nothing to do with you because you act like a woman and you're supposed to act like a man. If we can change that, maybe the educational system ought to put more pressure on that. I certainly hope that the churches will put more pressure on that. I think that would be very beneficial for her.
If I could comment, maybe that goes to the issue of, for people who are gay or lesbian, the idea of coming out is a hard thing. First you come out to yourself, and that's a hard thing. It's that internal struggle of, because we're all socialized a certain way, and so for gay or lesbian people, you realize at some age that you are different, and then the first reaction is you don't like that, and then you have to work through that. So I mean, I think what you're saying is speaks directly to what people go through themselves.
I talk with an accent, so I'm different. People never ask you, where do you come from? They don't ask me. I can't help it, but I am different in that aspect. They are different in their aspect. They can't help it either.
I think you bring up a really good point too, which is also that I'm a huge foe of the colorblind school of diversity, which is like, people have this way of saying, I don't see you as black, I see you as my neighbor. Well, one, you're lying, and two, you're denying this person's reminded that they're black every single day. Or I don't see you as fat, I just see you as my friend Jennifer. Well, they're reminded with everything, everywhere they sit, every kid who stares and makes fun, everyone's reminded that they're different all the time. The point isn't to say, he's just like no, you're different, and that's wonderful. You're different, and that is part of who you are. Right, and there are people in our society, we tend to hang around with people who are just like ourselves. It's the way we gravitate in rooms, at parties, at events. We hang around people that are just like ourselves. But there are people who go, what, you're from India? Or wow, I hear that accent. Where are you from? And they want to engage, and they want to go to festivals of different cultures and be around people that are not just like themselves. How do we do that? There are some folks who aren't yet to tolerance, and I understand to teach tolerance, we have to get some people to tolerance, but many of us are at the celebrating, like really actively wanting to celebrate and get people to be excited about diversity and differences, and not see it as some kind of setback. And I think that that's the school of thought that I come from, which is we're going to continue recycling racism and homophobia and sexism and sizeism and all that stuff if we keep pushing diversity under the rug and pretending like it's not there. Oh, I don't see your difference, even though you totally see their difference. And that's it's kind of talking about what you're talking about there, which is we have to first ask ourselves, how do I feel about the fact that this person's different? How do we eliminate that next step of get away, fight or flight, and actually say, let's engage. And I think that's the challenge for the work we're doing, which is, embrace it.
I don't think we could ask for a better close to this portion of the program. Sean, we also know how you need your rainbow flag on your house.
Yes.
Many thanks to each of you for taking the time. Let us celebrate everyone in the room who truly cares. We do have a reception coming up and some munchies and the like, and I need to know where that is, Kim.
That is in the Imperial Ballroom, and it's way on the other side of the hotel. And there's lots of cheese and wine and other things there. And if you have problems with steps, you'll want to take the elevator to the first floor and go to the Imperial Ballroom, because there's all steps all the way down into the ballroom. So just so you know. And then we can continue this celebration and this conversation. Did you have a question that you wanted to? Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you.